Hello, School Transportation Nations. Tony Corpin here. Excited to bring you the podcast. Is brought to you by TransFinder, the leader in school bus routing software. We have our friends from Vera Mobility joining us as a sponsor this week. Also, Gregg Prettyman, VP of FirstAlt by First Student, is joining us for a great interview to talk about alternative student transportation solutions. Excited for that combo a little bit later here. But before we jump into the headlines with Mr. Ryan Gray, editorial extraordinaire, going to read you a special message from TransFinder. Hey, Ryan, do you remember the dynamic duo Batman and Robin from the old 60s show Bang Boom Pow, right? Well, there's a new dynamic duo on the scene. That's TransFinder's Route Finder Plus and Wayfinder. Route Finder Plus is TransFinder's award-winning industry-leading routing solution, and Wayfinder is the driver app that is changing the way drivers and subs approach their routes. Together, this pair provides the winning combination to help combat your school transportation woes, including driver shortage, inefficiencies, student discipline issues, while helping you improve the driver experience. Route Finder Plus is intuitive, browser-based, and includes route optimization to help you build the most efficient routes possible. Wayfinder, the driver app, provides turn-by-turn instructions and allows users to take attendance and work seamlessly with Plus. You guys can learn more about this dynamic duo by emailing getplus@transfinder.com or giving them a call at 800-373-3609. All right, we're back, Ryan. Man, my feet are tired from last week. We went to ACT Expo, Advanced Clean Transportation. Green technology was on display. It was like almost 12,000 attendees. The trade show must have been 2.5 miles. I don't know, Ryan, how many steps. Did you get in a lot of steps?
I don't know. My little smartwatch broke, but got a lot. My feet were tired, my back. But yeah, like you mentioned, over 11,000 attendees, 275 exhibitors, more or less. And what was really interesting to me, Tony, was, God, it seemed like at least a dozen or more were very familiar names. A lot of folks that are at our trade show, at industry shows, certainly the major players on the OEM market, basically just about every brand that's available is represented in some way, shape, or form. We had Cummins, Allison, Transmission, just the list went on and on. So that was pretty cool. When we started going to this conference several years ago, Tony, what it was like, a couple of the OEMs were there, but they were really showing their trucks, right? And it was school bus was an afterthought. Now it's almost maybe not quite to the level of an industry school bus industry show, but boy, it's interesting all the folks that you run into and they see you. Hey, Ryan. Hey, Tony.
Yeah, they start to recognize you, right? I feel like I went to this conference. I probably didn't know anyone. Now people are walking by and I don't even know who they are. I'm like, hey, I met them before, but maybe at the other conference. So it's fun to see that. And I know, it was really prevalent, right? You don't really see a lot of school transportation districts. I saw a few of the big contractors like First Student, National Express, and Beacon Mobility, right? Some of the bigs are there walking around, checking out the landscape with their procurement people and engineers and such. But for the most part, it's really kind of a technology conference that really is highlighting around green, right? So heavy on the truck fleet side, but that's why DTNA, Thomas Built Buses, IC Bus with Navistar, all their big wigs are there. John O'Leary, who you sat down with at the conference and we had a chat with, he also provided a great keynote talking more holistically about where green energy was going. We had IC Bus and Navistar's CEO, Matthias Karlbahn. They had a press conference in their booth talking a lot about the future of what they have. We'll get into that in a minute. Lion Electric was there. Mark Bedard, who's the CEO, and their team are there. So many familiar faces. Bluebird, we saw Bluebird there as well. Britain was there. We had him on a panel. kind of talk to him about deployments with a series of people. I know Esperanza Perez from EPA Region 9, who's going to be at STN Expo and Green Bus Summit. So we got a lot of familiar faces that we know. The Propane Education Council, Stephen Whaley and his team were there displaying a lot of different propane technologies. It's not all EV. I mean, I feel like some of the other green energy is kind of getting squeezed. There was probably 100 infrastructure charging companies. I knew maybe a handful of them and a lot we didn't know. Battery companies, energy cell, hydrogen was a big talking point at this conference. What is the future? Cummins, I know you sat down with Amy Davis, the president at Accelera, which is the new Cummins division. And she talked a lot about in her press conference, hydrogen and how they're making an investment and really looking at future technologies. And this is where we're kind of prognosticating, guys. Like when we go to these conferences, we're trying to get the trends for you to kind of share what we see. And we're sitting down with these leaders that normally we wouldn't see at our conferences, but they're here at this one. So it gives us great access to all these great leaders to provide really amazing content and get the real insights from these market trend leaders. And I mean, these are not little companies. These are mega big cap companies that are doing big things, making big investments. And that is going to trickle down to the school bus industry, guys. And we're going to be the beneficiaries of all this amazing technology. And school bus is usually the tail wagging the dog. We're at the front. We're getting fed first, right? With all this alternative energy funding, which was a big talking point at this conference. Funding was huge, especially with the EPA Clean School Bus Program grant. A lot of people were talking about stacking grants with different things like HVIP here in California. There's a bunch of other grants, DERA, VW Mitigation Trust Fund money. We're hearing a lot of other ICE engine based things where they're trying to phase it out. There's other funding available now. We're going to have to fight a little more. That's just not exclusive for school transportation, but there's other grants that we can go after as an industry. And we're going to try to educate that at our conferences. So STN Expo coming up, Indy, June 2nd through the 6th, plus our Green Bus Summit there, as well as STN Expo in Reno. We've got deadlines coming up on that. For Indy, we have a May 12th is our online deadline cutoff. So guys, better get on it because this podcast, when it comes out, it's going to be real close to that date, I think. And also for STN Expo in Reno, we have a June 9th early bird deadline to save 100. So there's so much great content. Go to stnexpo.com to get all that info for Green Bus Summit. But man, Ryan, where do we start, man? There is just like a mountain of places to go. You want to kick it off? Maybe talk about some of the Q&As that you had with some of these CEO market setters?
Absolutely. Yeah. So you mentioned John O'Leary, familiar name in the school bus industry, back about 10, 15 years ago or so. A lot of you remember that he was the president and CEO of Thomas Built Buses, and then moved up the chain there at the parent company, DTNA, and is now the president and CEO of the Big Daddy Corporation. He opened the sessions or opened the conference with a keynote last Monday afternoon. Sat down with him actually that morning, got a little bit of a preview and really talked a lot about certainly electric, but, what's on the forefront of so many of our readers and our listeners' minds right now is what about diesel, right? We have this 2027 regulation staring us in the face from EPA, basically just, making those emission standards even more strict. It's going to, drive up the price even more of diesel, complicate the emission systems even more. We've seen the maintenance costs for diesel skyrocket over the last decade tied to these regulatory moves. And really the $60,000 question that we've been asking folks is, okay, what does this mean? Are we looking at the end of diesel and when will that happen? I think everybody is in agreement that day will come, but we still have some years ahead of us. John basically told me it's going to differ state by state. Obviously, there's a lot of other regulations involved. California just passed its advanced clean trucks rule or implemented it. It doesn't affect school buses per se, but we know that in California, 2045 is basically the year when they're eyeing to have all school buses electric. We know New York State is, even more aggressive with its 2035 mandate to have all school buses be electric. And other states are following suit. There's at least a dozen other states that are doing something or have done something following suit with one of these states. So he basically told me probably around, late 2030s, definitely by 2040, we'll see diesel sunset. But of course, Daimler Trucks North America, they have a huge diesel footprint with their Detroit engine. And that has been a big mainstay with Thomas over the last several years. And of course, they have a big relationship with Cummins as well, which we know, is like 2/3 of the, diesel engines out there in the commercial space. So I talked to him a little bit about that. And certainly, with the Julie C2 safety liner from Thomas Built Buses, a lot of R&D has been going into that. There's, several hundred of those out on the road right now. Along with all the other electric buses. Certainly that's kind of where they're going in the future with school buses. But he said, certainly diesel still very much has a place in the industry. And, we talked, I talked with him and as well as with other leaders, such as like at Cummins, about what's the runway look like for that. There's going to need to be continued service and training, product fulfillment. Certainly the parts business is going to really be alive and well for several decades when it comes to diesel, because, obviously there's the replacement cycles for those states that have them or those districts that have them. But we know that diesel buses and trucks, they can last up to 20, 25 years. Now, traditionally, we've not wanted school buses to last that long because, that's why the EPA had so much regulation in place, is they were trying to clean up those old, dirty diesels from the 80s and the 90s and even before that. And certainly there's still, probably too many 30-plus-year-old school buses out on the road. I think California still has several dozen of those, like 60 or 70 30-plus-year school buses out there.
I think those are Crowns, Ryan. I still see those Crown buses running around. I'm like, Crown, how long has that not been around?
And granted, those are not on routes, I would imagine, but they're still in operation, probably maybe for field trips. And part of this discussion, too, is with electric buses, with the 3,000 or 4,000, give or take, electric school buses out on the road right now, the lesson being learned is that, of course, the range is not there for those longer rural routes, for sports activity trips, extracurricular trips, a lot of field trips. Anything that's going to go more than 30 or 40 miles one way is probably not going to be a good application for electric, at least today. So many school districts are keeping their diesel buses longer. And something that was pretty interesting, regarding around that conversation is in the scaling electric school bus deployment breakout session that was held last Wednesday on the second to last day, the penultimate day of ACT Expo, El Monte Union High School District. Lena Luna is their sustainability manager and was really involved with their electrification project over the last several years. And interestingly, I think it echoes what a lot of folks are thinking about the Clean School Bus Program. El Monte here in the Southern California area, they're not taking advantage of the EPA program. And they have a high population of students at that line of demarcation that the feds are looking at for funding with the disadvantaged communities, using census data to, look at low income. And they're bypassing this EPA program because EPA program requires older diesel buses to be scrapped. And El Monte and a growing number of school districts out there are saying, whoa, time out. We can't scrap these buses. We need them to continue to fulfill our operations. We need them for those longer routes. So just a whole bunch, like you mentioned, to unpack. It was really interesting to get with some of these leaders, like you mentioned, Tony, that we normally don't have FaceTime with. and get to talk school buses. And granted, these folks like John O'Leary or Amy Davis at Accelera by Cummins and others, they're of course focused on so much more. But you can really see the passion come through for school buses. As I mentioned, of course, John O'Leary still's got yellow pumping through his veins. But these are again our global reach companies, and so many millions, if not billions, of dollars are out there and being generated, being raised, being granted for this whole zero emissions trek. So really interesting stuff. There was some new buses that were also on display. Ford Pro, so their e-mobility unit, they're launching their own school bus. So that was pretty interesting. Tony, I know you spoke with Christian Krepke, who is one of their leaders on that project. What did you learn about that bus?
Yeah, so I got an opportunity to interview Christian, and Ford Pro had teased this EV Collins Type A, right? It was displayed at the Work Truck Show in Indianapolis about a month ago, and it got our attention because we were like, what's a school bus doing at a Work Truck Show? And Ford Pro pumped it out. And then I was on a podcast with Gary V and Wanda Young, who was their CMO, basically. And she was saying they got enormous reaction and inbound inquiries from that placement of that vehicle at that show because it really stood out. And I found that to be intriguing. And then fast forward, on May 1st, Ford Pro releases a press release saying first of its kind Type A electric line built school bus. Whoa. Kind of like had to pause for a second and say, hey, we got to go over and talk to Ford Pro. And they were so kind to, Christian is the brand manager, and he gave us kind of the real on that. And really, for now, it's a 12 passenger and an 8 passenger, which is their E350 Transit basically use case, right? So it's smaller than a traditional Type A that would have maybe a 24 passenger. But one could surmise, Ryan, that this is a first generation, and that chances are that we might see this EV platform proliferate through the Ford platforms, which could mean we could see larger capacity vehicles. Now, I asked about the Collins bus relationship, and basically they said it's a collaboration. That's how they defined it. It's a collaboration. It is not exclusive. They can work with other manufacturers because it wasn't really clear in the press release, but he clarified that. So we may see some new tech hitting the market. Now, I asked, is this coming to STN Expo in Reno or Indy? And he said, I'm not sure yet, but you might see it. So guys, this is like, you're going to see some new equipment. I'm pumped to see all this innovation in the market around green energy. You've got one of the biggest auto manufacturing companies in the world now line building an electric bus. Wow. Mm-hmm. That is pretty crazy.
Absolutely. And Collins had another bus on display as well. And that's on a GM chassis that is electrified by Lightning e-motors. And this goes back to an announcement they made last summer. But this bus was there. And really it's, I caught up with Cash Setti at Lightning e-motors and kind of gave me a little bit of additional insight on this ZE4 electric chassis that's built on that GM 450 platform, a very popular gasoline platform for Type A's, as most of the readers know. So, Lightning, they're an electric specialty vehicle modifier for GM. And so they have this bus also. So, we definitely following between, this Lightning e-motor / GM partnership, the partnership with Ford Pro, it definitely is now backing up what we've been told for the last year or so, that Collins was really ramping up its Type A offerings. And certainly, we know that Microbird is the leader right now, as the most number out there of electric school buses. So, so much of our conversation is about the big boys, right? About Type C, Type D. But we're really seeing growth all across the spectrum. So just more and more ESBs coming at you. And speaking of the big boys, BYD They did not have this on display. It's not available yet, but we did learn from their executives over there that the company is going to be releasing a Type C, its first Type C electric school bus later this year. So definitely as we get into 2024, it will be interesting to see yet another option arriving on the market.
Yeah, I caught up with Frank Gerardo, who's their senior VP of communications, and Frank gave me a video interview talking about that Type C. So guys, make sure you check the STN website for all the video interviews that we caught from different partners there at ACT Expo. We tried to run around the hall and interview as many people as we could. It was a whirlwind of action, but lots of content, lots of stories on the STN website.
Absolutely.
Really great stuff.
Yeah. And Tony, all this talk about vehicles, but as our readers and listeners know, what about the infrastructure? That's the biggest hurdle, obstacle right now.
Pain point, huge pain point. Right?
And, and we haven't talked about that, but it's, definitely what raised my eyebrows was an announcement that IC Bus and International Trucks made. You mentioned Matthias Karlbaum, CEO of Navistar, was there at a press conference, joined by Trish Reed, of course.
Familiar name, right? From Bus?
Yes, formerly the VP and GM of IC Bus. She's now heading up the entire electrification division for Navistar, International Trucks, and IC Bus. So they announced a really interesting partnership with a company called Quanta Services. This is a global company. If you've never heard of Quanta Services, essentially they are a power generation company. This is a company that's deep into construction and contracting for electrical infrastructure, charging. They're even, communications, implementing 5G. Like I mentioned, a global company. And this relationship is essentially going to provide what Trish called a one-stop shop solution for IC Bus customers, where, IC Bus is partnering and bringing in Quanta Services from the very beginning. So a school district or a bus contractor orders an electric bus from IC, and from the get-go, Quanta Services will be working with that school district very closely, basically holding their hand throughout the entire process, from the planning stages, writing up the schematics, looking at, where the power needs to go, very engaged with the utilities, obviously all the way throughout the construction phase, and then deployment and afterward. One of the things that IC Bus is also bringing to this is going to be analyzing all the routes, analyzing the yards, everything. So that really, raised my eyebrows, because there are certainly a lot of conversations out there, both, in the industry and at ACT Expo last week, about that infrastructure stuff.
Yeah, Trish defined it as the path to a seamless transition, because at this point, it's not seamless, and it's wrought with pitfalls and turns and booby traps. It's definitely not so easy. So they're trying to help support their customers and simplify the process. And I think those are the big challenges, Ryan. And we also talk about infrastructure, right? As you hit on, that was a big point of conversation, that a lot of these grants are tied to getting the buses there. The OEMs are building the buses. The dealers are getting the buses. They're having to sit on the buses until infrastructure arrives. And that seems to be a really big bottleneck that we heard throughout the conference. So we got a lot of work to do with our public utilities to get over the hump. And I think as school transportation, you're kind of hostage, right? Like, you can only move as fast as the weakest link, which is pretty much sounds like it. Now, from what I heard, is a lot of the regional, more kind of specialized utilities are moving much faster. They're being much more judicious. They're making decisions quick. They're helping their customers within the regions. It's the really big kind of conglomerates. Someone called it an aircraft carrier turning in a lake. It is just, it sounds insane, right? Like, how do you do that? And the amount of power that some people are asking for, it's basically asking for an electrical substation at your district. Right? That's what we're hearing. People are requesting. And the utilities are like, we can't do that. That is just not possible what you're asking for. So people have unrealistic expectations or an understanding of what these public utilities capabilities are to get power to their location.
Absolutely. Well, and that's not even to talk about once you get the buses and you have the infrastructure there. This is new technology, right? And, over and over again, I'm hearing from customers that these buses, very seldom you just plug them in and off they go. There's, like any new technology, they're figuring out bugs. But to your point about the grid, basically, it was pretty interesting at the beginning of ACT Expo last week. They released their 5th annual State of Sustainable Fleets report. And basically, they survey a couple hundred fleets, commercial, probably some school bus as well. So it's not just a school bus survey. And they look at deployment challenges across the spectrum, not just electric, hydrogen fuel cell, the low carbon fuels. And in this report, they're looking at trends as well. And again, we've reported along these lines recently, but what really stood out to me was grid capacity must grow by 60% before 2030. But then catch this, Tony, by another 300% by 2050 to meet nationwide electrification goals. And that just to the novice like myself, still learning, so much about electric technology, that just seems crazy to me. But I know that, you talk to a lot of the charging folks, the battery folks out there, and they say it sounds daunting, but they liken it to, like the days when the telephone was just making its way into the society, or the television. Everyone was thinking, oh my God, what is this? This is never going to happen. And look where we are today. So we can never underestimate where technology is going to take us, but certainly there are a lot of challenges out there for us to figure out. And, at the end of the day, when you're a school district or a school bus contractor making decisions today about buying a new bus, these factor in, that uncertainty still has a lot of people hamstrung.
Yeah, it's challenging times to kind of take this all in and digest it and make it kind of, what does it really mean for transportation, right? How do you dial yourself in? How do you bring in the stakeholders? What does it mean for your workforce, right? We heard a little bit workforce management. How and what's the stress it's going to put on your team? How do you give them the training to be able to be successful with these new technologies? So a lot more questions than answers, I think, Ryan. We definitely have a lot to really help people at the ST and Expo with in the Green Bus Summit. Man, I think we got our work cut out for us. We got a mountain of content that we're going to have to suss through and help you guys gain access to. And we'll keep reporting to help you kind of make the best decisions, educate yourself on all the technology and trends that are out there. But guys, before we jump into the next segment of the podcast, I want to bring you a message from our sponsor, Vera Mobility Crossing Guard Solutions. Guys, if you're concerned about safety for your students at school bus stops, are you struggling to force illegal passing incidents? Vera Mobility Crossing Guard Solution can help. Designed specifically for school bus safety, this turnkey solution reduces stop arm running and provides end-to-end support for transportation departments, school officials, and law enforcement. Crossing guard safety programs are violator funded, so there's no upfront cost to your school district or company. Visit veramobility.com/government to customize your school bus safety package today. That's VERRA mobility.com/government. Let's zero in on safety and keep our kids safe. All right, Ryan, we got a great interview coming up with Gregg Prettyman, VP FirstAlt, a First Student company. Get right to it.
All right, take it away, Tony.
All right, guys, excited to have on the podcast Gregg Prettyman, VP of Alternative Transportation for First Student, also FirstAlt. Gregg, welcome, man. Great to have you back on the podcast.
Thank you, Tony. Great to be back.
Excellent. Well, I know we were joking last time, godfather of alternative student transportation. And I think, people have been like writing you. They sent you like a game. You've got like a giant picture of the godfather now in your office. So always fun to kind of play around with that. But, in all seriousness, I mean, when you launched this alternative student transportation business for First Student back in November of 22, it was just like you had a dream, you were rolling it out, you got amazing feedback from the community of transportation professionals. Fast forward, here we are, May 23, which is what? That's not that long, what, 6-7 months? Talk to me about what is going on in the world of alternative student transportation and, give people a little taste too of what that exactly means in terms of scope.
Yeah, so alternative transportation, just kind of as a refresher, is really transporting anyone in a vehicle other than a school bus. As the growing demand for students going to special programs, students that may have special needs, or as you even see ATP programs, adult transition programs, or school of choice programs, really districts are finding it more efficient to utilize smaller vehicles, freeing their buses up for the larger capacity trips. So it's really a win-win situation for both the students and the districts. So like you said, First Student, the largest bus transportation company in the world. And as I came on board and we said, hey, I have a dream, let's build an alternative transportation solution and make First Student the first company with a complete transportation solution, end to end, whether you need a minivan or an SUV or a full-size bus, let's see what happens when we can offer partners a complete solution. So we launched in November at STN, and since then we're in 5 different states. We've just recently won a cooperative purchasing agreement award for alternative transportation, which will allow us to work with any district in the country through that. So I think it even caught me by surprise how fast we've grown and how fast it's caught on.
Excellent. Now let's talk a little bit about the technology, kind of the secret sauce of this. I know you talked a little bit about safety training, some of the kind of other things that you brought from your previous careers and saw kind of best practices and were able to kind of use the skills of all the people at First Student to kind of bring this to fruition. So you want to share a little bit about what that kind of looks like for the school transportation community?
Yeah, I'm telling you that alternative transportation technology makes Uber and Lyft technology look like just child's play. It is so complicated. I think in alternative transportation, there's just exceptions upon exceptions upon exceptions, right? Some students must ride alone. Some students need a particular driver. Other students may need certain equipment. So everything from finding the substitute driver for that student, it's much more difficult than your traditional transportation. You have to have a driver that has the right type of vehicle, that has the equipment requirements to fit that student's needs. So we dove in and we just really, we spent a solid 6 to 8 months just simply brainstorming, putting together all the requirements, all the exceptions, all those things we've learned over a decade of experience, and really built a technology platform from the ground up for us and for the students that we serve. And more importantly, I think in some ways, the transportation partners we work with, they're a vital piece of this as well. So they had a lot of input on how it was built. The districts had a lot of input. And I think the thing I'm most proud of, it's the first software built from the ground up specifically for alternative transportation.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So, Gregg, let's talk about the benefit to the school district client. So you've got 2 sides, right? So you may have someone had used this type of service or an iteration of the service before, and now they're using you, or they've never used alternative student transportation before, and now they're deploying it. What are kind of the benefits people are seeing by using the FirstAlt solution? What do you bring to the table that's different?
Yeah, I think what's different is we're not an alternative transportation company. We're a student transportation company. And so we've been able to leverage the relationships and the trust First Student has with their existing customers throughout the country, go into those customers, meet with them, and show them how they can further utilize First Student for students they have, maybe their McKinney-Vento or homeless population, special programs that they're running. And as you know, driver shortages are kind of rampant across the country, no matter if you're insourced or you outsource your transportation. So there's a lot of districts who they just weren't getting to trips, or they were having to use larger buses and drivers for trips that were inefficient. So we've been able to go into our existing customers, help them see the benefits of that, and really leverage those relationships that were already in place. So we're working with our existing customers who never thought they would use alternative transportation or really hadn't known the need for it, and helping them find both cost savings as well as kind of efficiencies in the resources that they have available to them.
Excellent. Now, you also mentioned McKinney-Vento students. So obviously, this is a big area where we've seen more homelessness and the need is rising. So is that a trend you're seeing across the country in a bigger way? Is there just a bigger population from when you started almost, a decade ago? It was a long time ago in the space. Like, how much more of that is prevalent in the market?
Yeah, that it's growing. Unfortunately, it's growing at a tremendous rate. And your heart goes out to these children. And for those who may not be fully aware, with the McKinney-Vento Act, what really the government and the districts are trying to do is ensure that these students have a consistency of educational experience. So that act really says, hey, if you're displaced, and I think a lot of people think of homeless as like literally maybe on the street, but really a better way to think of this is more displaced students. So students that might need to live with their grandparents for a certain amount of time or might need to move out of district to temporary housing. And what this act is meant to do is allow them to continue to attend their same school, same teachers, same friends. We know how important that is as you're growing up. And so I think twofold, more and more students are displaced, but also I think more districts and more parents are aware of this program and utilizing it. So yeah, it's continued to grow at a steady rate. And if you think about it, as that student population really grows throughout the year, you have to sign up for this program new every year. So it kind of resets back to zero and then slowly grows throughout the year. So when you have fixed assets, you may start with 50 students at the beginning of the year and end with 500 students at the end of the year in that program.
And then what are some other kind of ideal use cases to deploy alternative transportation solutions? I know with First Student, you have a holistic approach, obviously across the whole student transportation network.
Sure.
But in terms of if I'm a school district and I'm operating my own buses, what is really an ideal situation? I mean, we also see people maybe leveraging it because they have a driver shortage. And this is kind of a way to supplement the existing fleet to be able to kind of bridge the gap. Are you seeing more of that as a trend? Or what's kind of the more particular way that people are utilizing this beyond the McKinney-Vento stuff?
Yeah, I think there's a trend with those districts that are traditionally in-source for and own their own buses and have employee drivers within the school district. They are suffering from the same driver shortage issues that transportation companies are as well. So we've seen more and more traditionally in-source districts reaching out for alternative solutions to exactly what you just said. We have a driver shortage. We need to get these students serviced right away. You can come in with alternative. No CDL is required, so you don't need a commercial driver's license. So we can find those drivers a little easier than they can, get them up and running, and then the district can continue to do their onboarding and continue to do HR outreach to hire those drivers. And when they bring them on, they can then kind of pull back on the alternative piece and put those students back on buses where it makes sense. So it's a really nice kind of transition piece for them, especially at the beginning of the school year while they're still trying to onboard enough drivers.
Now, I know the conversation about driver training and adequate driver training, as well as vehicle safety, has been a point of contention. What are you guys doing to kind of address this situation?
Yeah, I think there's two things. Legislatively, because this is somewhat of a new type of transportation, some states have been a little behind the curve, and some states might have over-regulated this where other states have under-regulated alternative transportation. So I think there's a big movement to make sure the state transportation directors and the districts are aware of, what some of the very minimums they should be requiring, and not to open it up so wide that just anyone can come pick up your student in any vehicle, but also not to make the standards so tight that you kind of eliminate the opportunity for alternative transportation. So that's the one piece, is helping states and districts understand what they should require and what they should expect. And then the second piece, as I mentioned before, which has really been, I think, a great talking point for us, is trying to mirror the transportation training that the bus drivers receive. They receive some of the best training in the market. Why not take that exact training and how to deal with students, how to de-escalate students that might be kind of escalating, and how to identify the elements of the rage cycle, and take that same training and apply it to your alternative transportation drivers. So really, I think a district should have this peace of mind of, regardless if a bus driver is pulling up in a yellow bus or a driver is pulling up in a minivan, both of those drivers have been trained adequately on how to transport students with special needs.
Excellent. Some great insights today with Gregg Prettyman. Appreciate you coming on the podcast. I see you got your Padres hat on that because, it's baseball season, San Diego love, right? We got LA out here in an STN world. So we'll battle each other. Hopefully we'll see you in the playoffs deeper in the fall, buddy. But hey, appreciate you coming on, sharing some of your knowledge with us. FirstAlt, doing some big things. Gregg, where can people find out more about FirstAlt if they're interested in connecting with you?
Yeah, you can go to First Student's website, or you can go to FirstAlt.com and find out all you need to know about us there, and reach out to us directly through the website.
Excellent. All right. Awesome discussion today, guys. Super excited for all the great conversations Ryan and I had about ACT Expo. STN Expo and Green Bus Summit are right coming up this summer. Make sure you sign up, stnexpo.com. Don't miss those deadlines. Special thanks to Gregg Prettyman for jumping on the podcast as well. Really enjoyed that conversation about alternative transportation trends. Also, special thanks to our sponsors, TransFinder, First Student, and Vera Mobility. Great to have you all with us as sponsors this month. Guys, don't forget, check out that May edition. It's all about safety and technology. Go to the STN website to catch it if you haven't read it, or if you got it in your mailbox, pick it up, read it, go through it. It's jam-packed full of great content. Ryan and the team have put together just an amazing issue again this month. Everything you need to know, guys, stnonline.com, video interviews, all the coverage of ACT Expo, everything that we got going on in the industry, trends, news releases, new products, energy technology. Man, I'm tired just thinking about it. Remember, guys, subscribe to the podcast, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen to pods. We love you, nation. We'll see you next week.